Even in the ocean, where morphology seems to have no rules, no status quo, Pycnogonida still feels out of place. I mean, come on, that's just too much leg for that body. Don't be greedy, nobody needs that much leg. Welcome to the Insect Spotlight Project, a channel dedicated to shining a light on insects, spiders, and any other creepy crawlies that get left out of the ecologic spotlight. Today, we are talking about the class Pycnogonida, better known as the sea spiders. Pycnogonida is a class within Chelicerata, a subphylum of arthropods containing the arachnids, the horseshoe crabs, and the sea spiders, along with some extinct groups. Now, there is a lot of debate going on with chelicerate phylogeny, or evolutionary history, specifically revolving around the arachnids and their relationship to the horseshoe crabs, and you can find all this fun stuff in my Shiphasura video. But by comparison, pycnogonids are pretty relaxed. I mean, they seem to be a true monophyletic grouping, meaning they can all be traced back to one unique common ancestor. More so, sea spiders seem to be the earliest diverging of the chelicerates, with some evidence pointing toward them splitting off from the rest of Chelicerata over 500 million years ago in the Cambrian period. Thus, Pycnogonida seems to be the sister group or closest relative to the Euchelicerata, a group comprising all of the other chelicerates. So regardless of how this arachnid horseshoe crab debate shakes out, Pycnogonida's placement on the chelicerate family tree doesn't really change. But that does not mean it is without debate. There are some that argue that the Pycnogonida are not the true sister group to the rest of the Chelicerata, and also, the sea spiders have a pretty poor fossil record, so it can make it hard to trace its phylogeny across hundreds of millions of years. But it still feels a lot less tumultuous than everything going on with the horseshoe crabs. Now, the class Pycnogonida has only one extant order, the Pantopoda, containing over 1,400 different species with a cosmopolitan and eurybathic distribution. Cosmopolitan meaning they're found worldwide, and eurybathic meaning they're found in both shallow and deep water. And while they're certainly not a common sight, given their widespread distribution, you may come across them in your tide pooling or snorkeling endeavors, so let's still go over how to be sure you're looking at a sea spider. In my other chelicerate videos, you've heard me talk about how the chelicerate body plan can usually be broken up into two broad regions, the prosoma and the opistosoma. In a spider, for example, you've got the cephalothorax, the prosoma, and the abdomen, the opistosoma. This is all well and good, but for the sea spiders, it's not very intuitive. The prosoma of a pycnogonid is basically everything you see here. The opistosoma would be that little nub at the very end of the body. It's an unsegmented anal tubercle, basically just the hindgut and the anus. But that's not very helpful, is it? So most of the time when we talk about sea spider body regions, you'll hear it broken up into the cephalon, the trunk, and the abdomen. Now the first thing you'll notice about the Pycnogonida is that they are mostly leg. Like way more leg than body. In fact, the name of their extant order, Pantopoda, means all leg. Pan, all, poda, leg. The name Pycnogonida kind of references this too. Pycnos means thick or dense, and goni means knee. So Pycnogonida roughly means thick-kneed. That central body there is even too small to hold all their organs, so you can find parts of their guts and their gonads extending out into their legs. And their surface area to volume ratio is so high, they don't even need gills. They just use cuticular respiration, diffusing gas directly through their integument. To be honest, this leg-to-body ratio will usually be enough to ID a sea spider, but let's just be annoying and get into the nitty-gritty of what's really going on with their morphology. Pycnogonid morphology is unlike anything we've ever discussed on this channel. It is weird, it is confusing, but we're just going to power through it, starting with the most anterior of those three body regions we discussed, the cephalon. Let's start simple. See those things that look like eyes? Those are its eyes. But these are not the complex compound eyes found in insects and such, but rather these are simple eyes, or ocelli, good for light detection and movement, but not as much for complex image forming. The raised structure in which you will find these ocelli is the ocular tubercle. Next, let's direct our attention towards the front of the cephalon. The proboscis-like structure you see is their proboscis, and at the end of the proboscis, you'll find their mouth. Their mouths are sort of Y-shaped with three movable lips. Directly next to the proboscis, you'll find the chelophores, and these are thought to be homologous to the chelicerae in the other chelicerates. Homologous meaning they're derived from the same ancestral trait. And they certainly look the part. Small claw-like appendages used to manipulate food. You can really see the resemblance in the chelicerae of the horseshoe crabs and such. Next to the chelophores, you have their palps. These are primarily tactile, helping the sea spider to feel around its environment and guide the proboscis when feeding. And next from the palps, you have the ovagers, and the males use these to carry around their eggs. Yeah, don't worry about it too much. We'll talk about why the males are carrying eggs later in the video. Now, I have a confession. All those wonderful, complex appendages we discussed on the cephalon, well, they vary wildly from group to group. I mean, you can count on the proboscis, and most males do need those ovagers to carry eggs, but everything else is up in the air. But one thing you can count on is their walking legs. Sea spiders will usually have 4 pairs of walking legs, just like the land spiders, though some will have 5 or even 6, which frankly just feels like overkill, but who am I to judge a creature that's been kicking it for hundreds of millions of years? Pycnogonids also come in a wide array of colors and sizes, with some groups boasting incredibly vibrant, almost artificial-looking hues, and others being pretty much pigmentless. Some groups growing to over 2 feet from leg to leg, and others being only a few millimeters. So as you can see, pycnogonids don't really care about morphological consistency. And to make matters worse, even members of the same species can look completely different from one another depending on their stage of life. Now overall, we can separate out the sea spider life cycle into egg, immature, and adult, but to just leave it at that would be a drastic oversimplification. When the sea spiders first hatch from their egg, they're what we call a protonymphon. This larval stage kind of just looks like a head, and these heads are often parasitic, latching on to an unlucky invertebrate host with sticky secretions from a spine on their chelophores. Not all protonymphons are parasitic though, some are licithotrophic, hatching from their eggs with a big store of yolk still readily available, and instead of attaching themselves on a host, they attach themselves to their parent, giving them a safe space to sip on this big gulp yolk sac and complete their initial development. From there, they enter their post-larval stage, as they begin to grow out their legs, their eyes, and add on some additional body segments. This is the anamorphic part of their development. Then eventually, they'll reach their juvenile stage. This is where the pycnogonid is still not reproductively mature, but is no longer adding segments. So they just look like mini sea spiders. There won't be any radical external changes before reaching adulthood. So although pycnogonid development can be described as egg, immature, and adult, that immature stage can be further broken up into larva, post-larva, and juvenile. So we've done all this talking about pycnogonid growth, but we haven't talked much about what they're actually eating. Once they start to grow out their legs and thus can move around a little bit better, most of them are going to leave their parasitic childhood behind and become free-living predators. They're benthic, so they crawl about the seafloor, and they feed on soft-bodied invertebrates like hydroids, sponges, and mollusks. But do they really outgrow their parasitic ways? To answer this, we need to flesh out what makes an animal a predator versus a parasite. In general, predators kill and consume their prey, while parasites don't directly kill the host on which they feed. By this definition, a lot of these pycnogonids are actually parasitic, as sea anemones and much of their other soft-bodied prey are not directly killed when fed upon. Now, there are some exceptions to this, of course. For example, some species will kill and consume marine worms. And then you've also got species like Endius spinosa, which are detritivores, mostly. E. spinosa eats a lot of things. They even practice herbivory, feeding on algae and such. But some sea spiders went the other direction and doubled down on the whole parasite persona. One species, for example, is an endoparasite of the manila clam, feeding on clam juices for most of its development. But it gets a lot weirder than that. Some sea spiders from the genus Sericosura eat methane, kind of. They live near methane seeps, farm methane-eating bacteria on their exoskeletons, and then feed on that bacteria for energy. One of the only things tying all this sea spider food together is that they don't move much. So the sea spiders don't really need to move that fast either. But they can swim when push comes to shove. Look at him go. But regardless of whether they are chewing or sucking or grazing, after a few months or a year or so, pycnogonids will reach adulthood and start thinking about settling down and starting a family. Sea spiders practice external fertilization, so the eggs are fertilized after they're released by the female, but they're not released from where you would think. The pycnogonid gonopore, or genital opening, is located on their leg. Or maybe you did assume that, because, like, where else is it coming out of? But the female does not just shoot these eggs out into the open ocean. The male is there and ready, often linked up to her in some way, and will take her eggs and cement them onto his body, often his ovidures, with a hardening mucus-like secretion. This way he can keep them under his watchful eye as they develop. Some males can be found with multiple egg masses from different females, and females can be found laying egg masses on multiple males. So these groups are polygynandrous. Most sea spiders can live many years after reaching maturity, and thus will mate multiple times across their life. However, some species do kick the bucket after one grand mating. But now you may be wondering how these fairly slow-moving, seemingly defenseless, alien-looking creatures survive in the big bad ocean. Well, they do have some great camouflaging skills, but also, they're not really worth the effort for most predators. I mean, look at these dudes. They're like mostly exoskeleton, though there is some chemical defense present. One species, for example, is known to sequester toxic alkaloids from its bryozoan prey. And even if they are injured in a predation event, pycnogonids have been shown to regenerate surprisingly well. And this isn't just growing back bits of leg and such. They've been shown to recover entire body regions, even parts of their guts and reproductive system. So okay, they're pretty good at sticking around. But do we like when they stick around? Well, there is one species of pycnogonid that is economically relevant. The parasitic pycnogonid Nymphanella tepidus loves feeding on manila clams. And unfortunately, we also love feeding on manila clams. And some of the fairly recent outbreaks of this sea spider in Japan have seemed to contribute to some mass clam mortality in the Tokyo Bay. So that's not great for their PR. But surely they have some positive impacts, right? While admittedly sea spiders don't have a super visible impact on our day-to-day lives, they may provide some population control for their invertebrate hosts and prey. Scavenging is also an important job in marine ecosystems. Nothing wasted. They also can be a host for epibionts, organisms that live on the surface of other organisms, so like barnacles and such. And now I know these things might not sound super exciting to you, but I want to stress that Pycnogonida is a heavily understudied group, and there may be many more impacts we just aren't aware of yet. But I think the most compelling argument for the protection of pycnogonids comes from Dr. Claudia Arango, a researcher at the Queensland Museum. She states, there is no living animal group that is closely related to the sea spiders. If we lose them, we lose a whole branch of the tree of life. So how can you, as an individual, help preserve this ancient marine relic of arthropod evolution? Well, the first step to that is to identify what threats these facehuggers face. Well, these are benthic organisms living on the seafloor, and like many other benthic organisms, one of the great threats they face is bottom trawling. Bottom trawling is when we take a weighted net and scrape it along the seabed to catch fish and other tasty morsels along the seafloor. The issue is you get a ton of bycatch, and it also acts like a bulldozer, removing all the precious corals, sponges, and other life that resides there. But even if you do want to avoid supporting this practice, knowing where your fish is coming from and how it was caught is not easy, especially when it's getting shipped in from halfway across the world. But overall, local is usually better. And though not feasible for everyone, your local fishmonger is going to know much more about the fish they carry than your average big chain supermarket. But consuming less or catching it yourself is definitely best. You can also support ocean conservation and restoration groups. These marine ecosystems are all connected. But anyway, thank you all for listening. And if you like the content, please remember to like and subscribe to keep up to date with future videos. And if you have any favorite species of sea spiders or any fun facts I missed, please leave them in the comments below. I always love hearing about them. Peace, y'all.